She accused me of infidelity, faked a pregnancy, and got caught red-handed. My name is Daniel, and I'm 28 years old. Up until recently, I was in a 2-year relationship with a woman named Sarah, who's 26. We met through a mutual friend at a birthday party in Chicago. One of those busy, loud gatherings where you only really know a couple of people, but you somehow end up connecting with exactly the right person. Sarah and I started chatting over a game of pool, and I was immediately drawn to her upbeat energy and creative spirit. She worked as a freelance designer, while I was establishing myself as a software engineer. Our schedules were hectic, but after that night, we both made time to see each other. For the first year, everything felt like a dream. We'd take spontaneous weekend trips to nearby towns, spend lazy Saturdays exploring the local coffee scene, and binge-watch our favorite shows on Sunday afternoons. I introduced her to my parents, who adored her creativity and warm demeanor. Meanwhile, her family seemed to approve of me, too. Her dad once joked that I was the calm to her storm. Unfortunately, once we hit the 1-year mark, cracks began to show. At first, Sarah made small, offhand comments about how I spent too much time at work or how I seemed awfully friendly with my female coworkers. I tried to reassure her by being transparent, letting her know when I was working late or texting a colleague. But her unease only grew. Soon, Sarah was asking to see my phone more often, questioning each message or social media notification. I'd come home from a long day at the office only to face her interrogation about every interaction I'd had. It reached a point where even hanging out with my closest friend, Matt, became a source of conflict. If Matt's girlfriend happened to be there, Sarah would insist I was hiding something, purely because another woman was present. The tension was exhausting, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own relationship. The breaking point came at my workplace. I was staying late with a colleague, Emily, to finalize a big project. Sarah showed up unannounced, visibly upset. She barged into the conference room, accusing Emily of trying to steal me and hurling insults at both of us. I'd never seen her so out of control. She knocked over a chair, shouted profanities, and it was only when building security arrived that the chaos subsided. Emily was shaken, and I was left humiliated in front of coworkers and higher-ups. That same night, I realized I couldn't continue living in this constant state of tension and mistrust. The next day, I confronted Sarah at her apartment, explaining that her accusations, invasions of privacy, and emotional outbursts were too much for me. I told her I needed to end things. She reacted with anger, tears, and threats, saying she'd make me regret leaving her and that she'd ruin my life. Then, almost as quickly as she'd erupted, she went silent. A few days later, she vanished from my day-to-day life, leaving me confused, a little scared, and relieved all at once. At the time, I thought that was the end of our story, just another toxic breakup with some drama thrown in. Little did I know, that final showdown at work was only the start of something far more complicated. In the weeks following my breakup with Sarah, I tried my best to slip back into a normal routine. I blocked her on every platform I could think of, phone, social media, even email, because I just couldn't handle the constant barrage of texts and calls. My days became all about pouring extra energy into work, hitting the gym more often, and reconnecting with friends I'd drifted away from during my turbulent relationship. It wasn't a perfect process. I'd still catch myself scrolling through old photos of us, wondering if I could have handled things differently, but gradually, I started feeling more like myself again. Then, one Friday evening, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My best friend Matt had already canceled our plans, and my parents usually text before they drop by. To my shock, Sarah stood on the other side, looking disheveled, her eyes rimmed with red. Before I could ask what she was doing there, she blurted, "I'm pregnant. It's yours." Everything else faded into the background, the hallway noise, the neighbor's dog barking. My mind spun. We had always been careful when it came to birth control, and given our breakup's explosive ending, a part of me instantly suspected she might be lying or exaggerating in an attempt to force a reconciliation. Still, the mention of a baby was too serious to ignore. I invited her in, admittedly more out of shock than politeness. As Sarah sat on my couch, she insisted she'd only found out recently and was terrified of how I'd react. Her eyes darted around my living room like she was searching for clues about what I'd been up to since she left. Tension prickled the air. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was pounding. I asked how far along she was, and she said roughly 8 weeks. My thoughts immediately flipped through the timeline. We had still been together 2 months ago, but we were fighting nonstop. Despite my racing mind, I mustered enough composure to tell her I needed proof, medical proof, before I could begin to process this news. She called me heartless for doubting her and accused me of being just as untrustworthy as ever. The irony stung, considering she'd spent months snooping through my phone and harassing my coworkers over imagined affairs. Eventually, I told her point blank, "Sarah, after everything that happened between us, I can't just take your word for it. If you're really pregnant, I'll be responsible. But I need to confirm it's mine. I want a paternity test." That last statement hit her like a slap in the face. She launched into a tirade, alternating between tearful pleas for me to just believe her and venomous threats about telling everyone I was abandoning my own child. The more she raged, the more convinced I became that I was right to ask for definitive proof. Finally, she stormed out, leaving the door wide open behind her. I stood in my living room, feeling as though the air had been sucked out of the place. Any sense of post-breakup calm was gone, replaced by a new wave of anxiety. If Sarah was telling the truth, my life was about to change in ways I'd never imagined. And if she was lying, I had no idea how far she would take this charade, or how many more bombshells she'd drop on me before it was all over. For a couple of tense weeks after Sarah's dramatic announcement, I heard almost nothing from her. I was torn between wanting clarity on her situation and dreading whatever fresh chaos she might bring into my life. Then, out of the blue, she sent me a short text. "I'm ready to give you proof. Let's meet." Part of me wondered if this was another tactic to manipulate me, but I also knew I needed concrete answers. We agreed on a public spot, a cozy cafe in the South Loop, where we could talk calmly. When Sarah walked in, she appeared noticeably different. Gone was the frantic energy that had fueled her furious tirade at my apartment. Instead, she seemed subdued, almost apologetic. Over lattes, she slid an envelope across the table. Inside were ultrasound images and a doctor's report confirming she was about 10 weeks pregnant. The grainy photos looked so surreal that my hands trembled. For the first time, I considered the possibility that she might be telling the truth. Sarah also mentioned she'd be willing to undergo a paternity test once it was medically safe to do so. As we sat there in that busy cafe, the tension between us thawed, if only slightly. She acknowledged how our relationship had ended so badly, and I confessed my own fears about becoming a father under such uncertain circumstances. We didn't resolve everything that afternoon, but we reached a fragile truce. I'd stay open-minded and support her as best I could, provided she followed through on the test. After all, if this was real, I owed it to both of us to face it head-on. In the following days, I gradually let my guard down. I told my parents the bare-bones truth, that Sarah claimed to be pregnant, had shown me medical proof, and was agreeing to a paternity test. My mom was worried but also excited by the notion of a grandchild, while my dad was skeptical, reminding me of all the turmoil Sarah had caused. I also looped in my best friend Matt, who was shocked but gave me his unwavering support. For the first time since the breakup, I felt like there was a path forward, albeit one fraught with uncertainty. Then came the phone call that altered everything. Late one night, my cell buzzed with Sarah's name lighting up the screen. Her voice was choked with tears. She was in the ER, experiencing heavy bleeding. Fear gripped me as I raced to the hospital, bracing myself for the worst. A few agonizing hours later, the doctor confirmed she'd had a miscarriage. Standing beside Sarah's bed, I watched as she wept, her face etched with sorrow and guilt. A tangle of emotions whipped through me: sadness for the loss of a potential child, relief at no longer being thrust into fatherhood under such strained circumstances, and overwhelming guilt for feeling that relief. Sarah was emotionally shattered. She apologized repeatedly for how she treated me, admitting that her paranoia and jealousy had spiraled out of control long before she ever realized she was pregnant. She confided in me that she decided to seek therapy to address her issues, something I'd urged her to consider back when we were still together. Although I felt a stab of empathy, I knew we both needed space to heal. That night, we agreed we wouldn't maintain close contact. We parted ways in the hospital parking lot, each of us grappling with conflicting emotions, unsure of what might lie ahead. A month after Sarah's miscarriage, I was trying my best to move on from the roller coaster of emotional whiplash. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. The man on the other end introduced himself as Robert. He claimed he'd been seeing Sarah for a while, during one of our breaks, and had something important to tell me. Though I was skeptical at first, something in his tone made me agree to meet up. We decided on a quiet bar in Wicker Park, a place far from prying eyes. The next evening, I found myself sitting across from Robert, both of us nursing a beer. He seemed nervous as he started explaining that he'd recently discovered Sarah was pregnant, but that he believed he was the child's real father. When I tried to tell him about the miscarriage, he sighed and said he already knew, adding that it had been devastating to hear. Then, without warning, he handed me his phone. "You need to see these," he said, tapping on a string of messages. What I saw made my stomach drop. The texts were from Sarah to Robert, dating back several months. Around the same time, she'd been accusing me of cheating. In these messages, Sarah expressed doubts about wanting to stay with me but admitted I was the safer bet, financially. One particularly damning text read, "If I can convince Daniel it's his baby, he'll take care of everything." My hands shook as I scrolled through her words, detailing how she planned to use my concerns about fatherhood to trap me into staying. I felt sick. All the times Sarah had demanded to check my phone, accused me of flirting with coworkers, and staged blow-ups at my job suddenly took on a grotesque new light. While she was painting me as the unfaithful one, she'd actually been seeing Robert on the side, and more disturbingly, plotting to pin a pregnancy on me that wasn't even mine. Anger bubbled up inside me, so intense I could hardly speak. Once Robert had finished explaining his side, he apologized for his part in the mess, saying he believed I deserved to know the truth. Despite my fury, I appreciated his honesty. The next day, I contacted Sarah to demand an explanation. We met at a neutral location, a busy cafe in the Loop. As soon as she saw my face, she seemed to know I was onto her. When I confronted her with the text messages, she broke down. She admitted to lying about the baby's paternity and confessed she'd used my name as a fallback, assuming I'd be a reliable father. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she pleaded for forgiveness, claiming she'd been scared and insecure. But there was no going back from this level of betrayal. I told her I never wanted to see or hear from her again. Any shred of sympathy I might have felt vanished under the weight of her deceit. After I left, I reached out to my parents and a few close friends, detailing what really happened. I didn't want Sarah spinning another web of half-truths. Although reliving the pain was brutal, I needed them to understand the full story. Walking away that day, I felt equal parts rage and relief. Sarah's toxic hold on my life was finally broken, though the scars remained. All I could do now was pick up the pieces and try to move forward, free from her manipulations. At last, in the weeks following my final confrontation with Sarah, I experienced a swirl of emotions: anger, relief, regret, and, perhaps most strongly, an overwhelming sense of disbelief at how deeply I'd been deceived. Reflecting on the entire 2-year relationship, I realized how blind I'd been to the red flags and how easily I'd dismissed my instincts. I kept asking myself the same questions. Why did I ignore the signs? Why did I let myself be manipulated for so long? As painful as it was, that self-reflection helped me see just how toxic and one-sided things had become. A small part of me wished I could reclaim those years and invest them in healthier pursuits or relationships, but I tried not to dwell on regrets for too long. Fortunately, the situation at work began to improve almost immediately after everything came to light. For months, some of my colleagues had viewed me as the guy with the crazy ex, especially after the scene Sarah caused in our conference room. But once word spread, mostly through polite, matter-of-fact explanations I gave to a few key people, the tension eased. My boss in HR even offered support if I needed any scheduling flexibility, which I appreciated. It was a relief to walk into the office without worrying about whispered conversations behind my back. Emily, the coworker who'd been Sarah's primary target, was kind enough to let bygones be bygones. Our interactions returned to a comfortable professionalism, occasionally punctuated by friendly banter. Perhaps more unexpectedly, I sensed a subtle shift with Emily. We'd always been on good terms, but in the aftermath of this drama, I noticed a gentle warmth in our conversations, lingering eye contact, small inside jokes, genuine smiles that lasted a little longer than normal. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, or if she was genuinely interested in something beyond workplace camaraderie. Still, I was wary. After everything with Sarah, trusting someone romantically felt like stepping onto cracked ice. I reminded myself that I needed time to recalibrate, to ensure I wasn't diving into a rebound. If Emily and I ever ventured beyond friendship, it would have to be built on solid ground. Outside of work, I made a conscious effort to reclaim parts of my life I'd put on hold. I dusted off my running shoes and returned to early morning jogs along the lakefront, a habit I'd all but abandoned during the tumult with Sarah. The rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement felt therapeutic, a tangible way to release pent-up stress. I also reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in months. We'd meet up for trivia nights or just relax at someone's apartment, catching up on everything that had happened in our lives. It was refreshing to talk about normal topics, favorite TV series, new restaurant openings, that random band playing at a local dive bar, without the overshadowing drama. Meanwhile, my dedication at work paid off. The company had taken notice of my recent projects, and I found myself in line for a promotion, a development role with more leadership responsibilities. The day my boss pulled me aside to discuss the possibility, I felt a surge of pride I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as though my life was finally moving in a positive direction, free from the weight of Sarah's accusations and manipulations. Though the wounds from my past relationship were still fresh, I sensed real progress for my career, my personal well-being, and possibly my future love life. I'd learned a hard lesson in recognizing red flags and valuing my own boundaries. Now, as I pushed forward, a cautious optimism grew within me. Maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to understand what it meant to stand on solid ground. Months passed, and my life began to stabilize in a way I hadn't experienced for a long time. Work was going well. I was slowly rebuilding my personal life, and the dark cloud of my history with Sarah felt like it was finally fading. Then, one ordinary evening, I ran into Robert again, of all places, in the produce aisle at a local supermarket. I recognized him first. He was comparing prices on fresh fruit, of all things. Despite the awkward history, I couldn't just turn on my heel and walk away. We ended up chatting briefly, and Robert dropped a bombshell. Sarah was pregnant again, and this time it was definitely his child. He mentioned that they weren't in a relationship per se, but that he was determined to co-parent responsibly. Sarah, he said, had been going to therapy and seemed genuinely committed to a healthier lifestyle. She'd asked Robert to find me and relay a message. She wanted a chance to apologize to me face to face. He also suggested that she was eager for closure, especially before welcoming a child into her life. I felt my stomach tighten at the thought of revisiting the past, but a part of me recognized the value in a final conversation. At first, I was torn between outright refusing and allowing my curiosity to get the better of me. Memories of her deceit and manipulation still lingered, but there was a whisper in the back of my mind that maybe hearing her out could help me put this chapter behind me for good. After a few days of wrestling with the idea, I finally messaged Robert, agreeing to meet Sarah under one condition. It had to be in a public place. He arranged a meeting at a quiet park on a sunny Saturday afternoon. When I arrived, I spotted Sarah sitting on a bench near the fountain. She looked different, tired, more subdued, yet oddly composed. She stood up as I approached but didn't come too close, respecting my space. The moment felt heavy, filled with unsaid apologies and lingering regrets. Finally, she spoke, explaining that she'd been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder during her therapy. Though she didn't use it as an excuse, she wanted me to understand the root of her erratic emotions and destructive behaviors. She confessed how deeply she regretted the lies about the baby's paternity and the toxic dynamics she'd created in our relationship. Tears rimmed her eyes as she asked for forgiveness, though she admitted she didn't expect it. I stood there, listening, my emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to unleash every ounce of anger I'd been harboring. Another part of me just wanted this to be over. In the end, I couldn't say, "I forgive you," outright, because that felt dishonest. But I also realized I no longer wanted to hold on to that bitterness. I simply told her I hoped her therapy would help her find stability, especially for the sake of her child. I wished her the best in her recovery and made it clear I didn't want her in my life anymore. No more messages, no more pleas for second chances. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, and thanked me for hearing her out. Without another word, I turned and walked away. As I left the park, I experienced a strange sense of peace. I hadn't forgiven her completely, and I wasn't sure I ever would, but at least I'd freed myself from the anger. In that quiet park under the Chicago sun, the chapter with Sarah finally came to a close, and I knew I could move forward. Lighter than before, and in the days that followed my final meeting with Sarah, I was stunned by the relief I felt. The constant weight of her deceptions, accusations, and the lingering what-ifs seemed to lift from my shoulders. I returned to work feeling lighter, determined to channel this fresh energy into my projects. It didn't go unnoticed. My boss, who had seen me through the whole ordeal, complimented my renewed focus, and my team seemed genuinely happy to have the old me back. Around that time, I started spending more moments with Emily, often grabbing coffee together before heading to our desks. We'd laugh about harmless workplace gossip or swap stories about our weekend plans. One evening, after a late shift finalizing a project, I mustered the courage to ask if she wanted to get dinner. She looked at me for a moment, that half-smile dancing on her lips, and said, "I'd like that." It was more than just a simple acceptance. It felt like an unspoken acknowledgement that the awkwardness and drama of my past was finally behind me. On the night we had dinner, we talked openly, really openly, for the first time. Emily admitted she'd been hesitant to approach me romantically because of everything I'd been through with Sarah. She didn't want to be another complication in my life. I confessed that I'd been worried about appearing too eager, given my recent breakup and all its messy fallout. We laughed at how carefully we'd both been tiptoeing around each other's feelings. By the end of the evening, we decided to give ourselves a shot, while also agreeing to maintain professionalism at work. We didn't want to give HR any more excitement than they'd already had. With that settled, it was as if the last door to my old life finally closed. I no longer felt the urge to look over my shoulder or wonder how Sarah was doing. I wished her the best, of course, I truly did. But her path was her own now, and I had no intention of walking it with her. Robert was handling fatherhood, she was handling therapy, and I was handling the task of moving forward with my life. And, honestly, it felt incredible. My parents, always my rock, were relieved to see me moving on in a healthier direction. My friend Matt, who'd been there through every ugly detail, offered a celebratory toast at his apartment, raising a beer to leaving the drama behind. Even my coworkers, who had once side-eyed me as the guy with the crazy ex, welcomed me into after-work outings and potlucks without that unspoken elephant in the room. On the professional front, I continued to excel. The company recognized my hard work and officially promoted me to a lead development role. I stepped into the position with a sense of pride, eager to guide new hires and collaborate more closely with Emily's department. Every day brought a fresh set of challenges, but they felt fulfilling rather than draining. Looking back, I realized I had learned some of the hardest lessons of my life. Lessons about trust, self-respect, and the importance of recognizing red flags. Yet for all the pain, there was growth too. Now I was free to imagine a future without the baggage of old betrayals. Standing on that threshold, with new love on the horizon, a rewarding career, and the unwavering support of friends and family, I understood what true relief and hope felt like. Because the truth is, once you finally close the door on a toxic chapter, an entire new story can begin. And it's a story you get to write on your own terms.